Talons are one of Battle Cat's best features, as with them, cats can both be fixed from their previous issues, gain new niches, or even become straight up OP depending on the cat. People have wanted talents for cats like the seasonal rares for a while, since the Lils and Percial specials got talents of their own, and before I decided to make a remake video on that same theoretical subject, I decided it'd be fun to talk about if the Crazed cats had talents instead, despite the fact that they definitely, for the most part, don't need any. And yes, like my last video, I technically already made a video about the seasonal rares getting talents, but please don't watch it because it's extremely cringe. The Crazed units are strong enough on their own, but maybe there could be extra Crazed stages in the future like there is for Bahamut and Valk that gives them talents. And for a situation like that, I decided to think up some talents that make sense for these cats. As usual though, before the video starts, here's a verse from the Bible. Colossians 3:2. Set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on earth. Clarifications. For this video, I want to follow the rules of how talents are implemented most of the time, which are usually attack and defense buff, and then 3 other skills, or just defense up and 4 other skills. And unlike my previous theoretical talent video, I won't be making any new talents, and I'll strictly be using pre-existing ones throughout. Though with attack and defense buffs, I will be using percentages outside of just 20% and 80% because sometimes 20% is too low and 80% is way too high. The final one is that I'm serious about trying to keep these units balanced as opposed to broken like how they could be with theoretical talents. So this feels like something you could actually see being put into an update. That's it for clarifications. Of course, leave your opinions on the talents I gave each of these cats in the comments. Manic Mohawk. Mohawk is a hard cat to give talents to because it feels like not really much can be changed due to the nature of how he works. He's just a meat shield you send out, and not even one that survives for any noticeable amount of time because he exists to get one shot. But here's what I had in mind. Talents: attack and defense buff, 20%, 250 NP for both. Move speed up, 28 movement speed to 36 movement speed, 125 NP. Knockback, 10% chance, one-time purchase for 50 NP. Cost down, 75C to 45C, 5 upgrades for 75 NP. Total 500 NP. So let's get into why I give him these talents. And by the way, if these cats get a new CC ability like weaken or knockback in this case and they don't target anyone, then assume that it's effective against everyone except metal. So attack and defense buff because they're standard, though even at level 50, with these buffs, he'd only have 10k HP as opposed to his usual 8k and a measly 644 DPS also when talented. Movement speed from 28 to 36 feels obvious, as he'd be able to get into the front line quicker and take a hit. And that's the entire point of his naturally high movement speed anyway. A 10% chance of KB for 50 NP was inspired by Gato Amigo's 15% chance of KB non-metals when that talent's maxed out. Though of course instead of costing 125 NP to max out, this one costs 50 NP because it depends on how you want to use Manic Mohawk and the chance is so low. The reason why the chance is low is because he's highly spammable and he's super fast. If he or a few of him can simply get into the blind spot of a strong enemy or just clip one with a single attack, it's fully possible that he'll be able to push them back, which could help a lot with pushing power. But this could also backfire depending on the other enemies in the stage. In short, knockback makes him a lot more aggressive on the off chance he lands some hits. And when put in tandem with his movement speed and spammability, the 10% chance is still low, but it's something that'd probably happen at least a few times in fights. Personally, I'd probably get it because it's interesting, but especially for this, I'd want to know what you would think if Manic Macho actually had this. Costing similarly to movement speed is self-explanatory. Making him cost the same as Lil Macho doesn't change much, but it could be nice if you're in an extremely cash tight stage. On top of this, it makes Lil Macho a bit useless unless you need slower meat shields for the density it could provide. Overall, I think that these talents I gave Manic Macho are both interesting, obvious, balanced, and the knockback one especially could change up how you use him entirely. Manic Eraser. Manic Eraser is one of those cats like Courier, Bloody Jack, or Crazed Manico that are already so naturally good that it feels like you'd have to give them weird specialist talents like they did with Lil Eraser that try to make him more effective against a specific trait, which misses the purpose of the original unit. Or I'd have to give him talents that are totally broken. But I think that I have some that are very solid for him. Talents: defense buff 30%, 125 NP. Resist toxic 8% per level, 80% at max for 125 NP. Weaken 10% chance, 20% weaken for 3 seconds for 75 NP. Wave immunity 75 NP. Warp immunity 75 NP. Total 475 NP. A 30% defense buff for 125 NP at level 50 gives him 33k HP compared to his regular 25k HP, which is 1k less than a 20 plus 90 normal eraser. While 33k HP is definitely more than enough to survive for longer than normal Eraser when they're both maxed, it's more like something nice as opposed to anything unbalanced or game breaking, as really this will afford you maybe a second or two of more defense. It's a nice upgrade, but it's definitely not necessary or as great as his other buffs. Most of his other talents are rather mundane, but probably the best one is his 80% resistance against toxic. Anti-toxic meat shields are sort of rare to come across, and simply getting this resistance for 125 NP is cheaper than having to upgrade Rice Ball's base HP for 125 NP and then getting his toxic immunity for 75 NP. With this, you're saving 75, using a unit that costs half as much, and if you buff Manic's health, he actually has more HP than Suna's health when maxed. Similarly to Rice though, this is rather situational, but at least Manic still has great generalist capabilities with being a variant of Wall and all that. So this talent is more like an addition to help him fight enemies that can use the toxic ability since he's so generally viable. His 10% chance to weaken by 20% for 3 seconds for 50 NP was inspired by Shingong's 50% weaken at a 5% chance for 95 NP. But this one's a bit cheaper since it's a one-time purchase. The thought behind this is that though Manic Eraser doesn't have multi-hit like Shingong, which really gives him like a 15% chance to get his weaken off since he has 3 hits, Manic costs way less, he's more spammable, and he can affect any enemy with it. Plus, he has area attack. Whether or not you'd get this talent depends on if you use weaken units often, because a 20% weaken isn't that great, and because of the very low chance, he's certainly not supposed to be used as a debuffer, but instead this effect should just help a tiny bit when fighting strong enemies. As for his immunities, the wave one feels very obvious. Manic is already strong enough to tank a little bit of waving damage, but if he can actually get in there and act as a meat shield without taking any previous damage, then I imagine that that'd be pretty useful. As for Warp, this would only be useful against, of course, aliens, as he'd be able to soak in their hits and stay in the front for longer, without being teleported away. Whether or not you think this is worthwhile depends on CATLANTIS' effectiveness on the stage, as it's possible that if it's mixed, CATLANTIS won't be so good. Manic Eraser's talents are especially simple and non-ambitious, but copying the route that Lil Eraser went wouldn't make sense, and sometimes simple is better than trying too hard. Manic Dark. Not surprisingly, making Manic Dark actually usable with talents is a struggle because of all of its extreme flaws, but this is how I thought of making this practically unusable unit into someone you might consider using in the right very niche scenarios. Talents: attack and defense buff 40%, 250 NP for both. Move speed up 12 to 25, 35 NP. Savage strike chance 6% per upgrade, 60% chance max, 125 NP. Freeze 30% chance for 1 second, 75 NP. Total 525 NP. Attack and defense buff at 40% isn't standard, but Manic Dark really needs it. At level 50, his HP goes from 16k to 23k, and his DPS goes from 4.7k to 6.6k. In versus Reds, he gets 47k HP or 15k HP per his 3 knockbacks, and he gets 10k DPS. His other talents are important for his usage against Reds, as he gains a movement speed up talent, which increases it from 12 to 25 for 75 NP total. I think this is self-explanatory, as one of Manic Dark's biggest problems outside of his bad HP and high KB count is the fact that he's too slow to even get in most of his damage a lot of the time. On top of this, he gains a 60% Savage Strike chance for 125 NP. This sounds kind of OP as per hit with talents at level 50. If he got a Savage Strike, he'd be dealing 18k damage per hit or 27k damage to Reds, and he'd have 20k DPS naturally or 30k DPS versus Reds. Though for DPS, that assumes that per second he's getting consistent Savage Strikes, which even if he procs it at a 60% chance is unlikely. And given his still bad HP, I think this is fair, and that's what saves this from being broken. His 30% freeze chance for 1 second for 75 NP also sounds OP, just like the Savage Strike chance, as he's very spammable, but this would only work on red enemies with low ranges or slow attack speeds. Against other traits, he's still pretty much helpless, unless they have a blind spot. I was mixed on giving him a level 1 or 2 wave instead of this freeze talent, as he doesn't have area attack at all, but I thought that freeze would make more sense given what I'm trying to do, and because in the Manic Dark and Crazed axe fight, he also has a freeze ability. The intent is to make Manic Dark better at what he's supposed to be good at, which is running in and dealing some nice damage while still being a meat shield. He still is a meat shield, but now if he can survive, he can both freeze any Reds, which helps all of your cats on the field, and with it he can actually deal some damage and stack to get off his extremely high DPS value. But again, this all hinges on if he can survive or not. If he can't proc his freeze, he still has 15k HP per his 3 knockbacks, which is only 5k more than the talented Manic Mohawk I talked about earlier against Reds. Outside of reds, he only has 7.9k HP per his 3 knockbacks, which is still terrible. In a generalist sense with these talents, now he can run in and deal potentially 18k damage if he can get a Savage Strike, and possibly way more if he can survive. Despite this high damage though, which even against reds is a bit less than Maglib's at level 30, he's still very much a glass cannon with a single target who only has 25 speed and can easily be killed by waves or longer range enemies with solid DPS. I'm somewhat mixed on if this is OP, if these talents would just completely fail, or if this is actually balanced. But I think that trying to make him into some kind of spammable rusher that's also useful in a hyper niche sense against some reds is the only way to make this guy worthwhile at all. Manic Macho Legs. Talents for Manic Macho Legs came pretty easily to me. They'd just be obvious, at least until it came to the last one. Talents: attack and defense buff 20%, 250 NP for both. Wave level up, +1 every upgrade. 50 NP per upgrade, way level 7, 200 NP. Recover speed up, 28 seconds to 18 seconds, 125 NP. Strong versus traitless, 75 NP. Total, 650 NP. Attack and defense buff are obviously standard, though some of you may think that the wave level up from 4 to 7 is a bit too much since that's the same wave level that Jelly Dumpling has. Though I disagree due to the high price of 200 NP to get this talent, and because Jelly deals 25k damage per wave at level 30, while at total max, that being level 50 with the talents, Manic Gross deals 8.2k damage per wave. His level 7 wave talent is still fair because Manic's damage is light even at max, and even though his recovery speed with his next talent goes from 28 seconds to 18 seconds, is still more than similar mid-rangers. Normal Macho Legs, for example, only has an 8-second recovery speed, and Camera has a 4-second one, Paris has a 2-second one, and even normal King Dragon has a 16-second cooldown and he's a backliner. The 10 seconds less just simply helps his stackability while still being a lot more than other mid-rangers for balancing purposes. The most controversial one I gave him was Strong versus Traitless, which would give him 81k HP and 12.6k damage per wave against them. I only did this because traitless units have a lot of the most annoying LD or otherwise very high range units that are extremely difficult to hit. And unlike aliens, for example, there basically exists no units just for sniping high range or LD traitless enemies. With this talent, you'd be more easily able to deal with annoying threats like Mr. Mole, Master A, Kamel, H-Naw if he's pushing hard, and Delphina, or even enemies like Crockley because he'd just be slow, which doesn't stop Manic Macho Legs from attacking. Most of these assume you have some kind of stepping stone, but even if you didn't, he'd still be able to get hits in most likely thanks to his high HP against the trait being 27k HP per his 3 knockbacks. That's about equal to normal Max Eraser's HP. Generally, I think if Manic Macho ever got talents and they're even kind of like this, despite them being the most expensive out of all the Crazed units, it's probably worth it because of his better range, spammability, and his new niche against traitless, as again, there are literally 0 non-gacha traitless snipers to my knowledge. Manic Lion. I had some interesting ideas for what Manic Lion should get since I believe he's a unit that have a lot of potential if he had talents unlike a few units I've already talked about on this list. And especially for him, I think that these talents would successfully give him a new, more aggressive niche that makes him way less underwhelming as a rusher. Talents: attack and defense buff 20%, 250 NP for both. Knockback: 20% chance, 2% per upgrade, 125 NP. Shield piercing: 20% chance, 2% per upgrade, 125 NP. Cost down: 750C to 500C, 125 NP. Total: 625 NP. His defense talent is his most important one as he gains 42k HP, and even though he still has 5 knockbacks, he gets more of a chance to proc his area attacking 20% KB against everyone aside metals. Depending on the situation and your timing, his super fast movement and attack speed would certainly allow for him to easily push back plenty of enemies if they're getting close to your base, similar to a talented Mister, except this works against every other trait. If Manic Lion can survive for a while, or if he can get a few on the field thanks to his cost down talent, which makes him cost 500C instead of 750C, then he should be in the clear from hard pushing enemies. Sometimes this could totally ruin your run or cause him to clip, as when enemies are knocked back, it lasts for 12 frames, while Manic Lion has 0 idle frames and has a 10 frame attack cycle. If I'm right on how this works, then for 2 frames, Manic Lion could potentially slowly clip through the enemy if you're not dealing with a lot of them, if he's getting consistent knockbacks, and if they're unable to do 8k damage in order to trigger one of his 5 knockbacks. Occasionally for cheesing strategies, this could be incredible, but for the most part this isn't intended, as it's more than likely that despite his 66 movement speed, he'll still be knocked back by your enemies since the knockback talent is supposed to turn him into a cheap hard pusher for just in case scenarios. I think that this makes him way more interesting as a rusher, as aside from again a talented hyper mister against zombies, there exists no rushers that push your enemies back hard so you have some breathing room. With a shield piercing talent as well and a 0.33 second attack cycle, he's definitely going to be able to pierce shields quickly if he can get in. Though he's vulnerable to surges, as I made sure not to give him surge immunity because of his other talents and his speed. You should be able to time him correctly to get him to pierce shields if you intend to use him in this way. And on top of this, it's possible that he'll even be able to knock back your Aku enemies. Overall, unless I'm thinking about how KB would mesh with him incorrectly, I think that this makes him far more interesting as kind of a stronger version of my proposed talented Manic Mohawk idea. As usual for videos this long, I want to share another verse from the Bible as a little break. James 4:10, humble yourselves before the Lord and he will exalt you. Manic Flying, talents, attack buff 30%, 125 NP, weaken immunity 75 NP, explosion 25% chance at standing range, 125 NP, attack frequency up 75 NP, 18 idle frames to 0, no delay between attacks, slow 4% chance to 40% max, 1 second, 125 NP. Total 525 NP. For this one, I didn't think a precursor message would be necessary, especially since I think these talents somewhat speak for themselves. No defense up and just attack buff by 30% makes sense since his HP is so low, and it gives him 9.3k DPS, which is extremely solid. Plus, his weakened immunity might be useful for scenarios where he can survive and not be knocked back by an enemy that can weaken him, but that scenario is probably niche, so this talent's only price is 75 NP for that reason. As for explosion, I think a one-time purchase for 125 NP for a 25% chance for him to do one makes sense because he's stackable and he already has a high DPS value. Plus per hit, he does 18k damage, and that damage expanding a bit forward and back would be nice and more befitting for him since his attack animation is a small nuclear bomb going off. With attack frequency up, him losing his idle frames and having no delay between attacks also ups DPS from 9.3k to 13.4k, as he'd only have a 1.36 second attack cycle. Finally, his slow abilities inspired by Brainwash Flying's 100% chance to slow traitless enemies for 2 seconds, though I gave Manic Flying a 40% chance at max to slow enemies for 1 second for 125 NP because Brainwash Flying slow is actually extremely good for keeping him alive, and it's what makes him a great unit versus whites he can outrange or get in the blind spot of. Manic Flying has 15 higher range than Brainwash Flying, and he can target anyone except metals, which is why I gave him a worse slow ability. Overall, these talents are pretty simple as they improve upon what Manic Flying was created to do, and they give him the explosion ability, which allows him to pierce just a little bit and deal a lot more damage, though it keeps his main flaws in place so that he's still very clearly him. Manic Island. Just like Manic Eraser, Manic Island is in that category of units that certainly do not need talents. If he got them, they'd either miss the point of what he's supposed to do like Little Eraser, and be inconsequential aside from stat buffs like Kitty of Liberty, or they'd be too broken like Awakened Bahamut. But I think that these talents are pretty fair and give him some better usage in new scenarios without making him broken. Talents. Attack and defense buff, 20%, 250 NP for both. Level 1 wave, initial 3% chance, goes up to 30% chance, 125 NP. Crit chance, 2% to 5%, 50 NP. Target alien, 75 NP. Total 500 MP. Immediately, everyone should look at the attack and defense buff and get them, even if they're just the standard 20%, as generally he'd have at max 71k HP or 23k HP per his 3 knockbacks and 10k DPS. And versus reds, he'd have 143k HP or 47k HP per his 3 knockbacks and 15k DPS. This makes him even more of a powerhouse, and it immediately make him generally viable again once you have access to talents. And after you beat his theoretical stage, it gives you access to his talents. His level 1 wave for a 30% chance was inspired by Pizza Cat, though unlike Pizza, where the intent was to increase his range and DPS, this is to give him a pseudo piercing area attack similar to his Lil variant. His crit chance being up to 5 for 50 NP is a total steal because it's the same as Catasaurus's base crit chance. And if he hits a crit on a metal enemy, they're surely dead and you know it. I don't even have to do calculations on that. His ability to target aliens makes him more viable against another trait as well, and aliens and reds appear together somewhat often. Overall, Manic Island was extremely powerful without talents, and with stats like these, he'd be able to easily help you throughout the entire game whenever a tanky generalist or anti-red/alien is fair game. Though despite his very good HP against his targets, he can't replace tanks like Ro or Soap because he has far less HP than them and he still has 3 knockbacks. I believe that these talents are all that he needs to continue being viable throughout the entire game. And even if I strip back his attack and defense buff to 10% for the same price, they'd still be absolute steals because of how powerful this island variant becomes with any stat buffs. And despite how much Manic Island gains from all of this, I don't think that this would be super game breaking or anything because these talents don't massively change anything. Manic Dragon. Out of everyone, this was the cat who was the hardest to make talents for, since he has 4 other variants that already do unique things. Manic Dragon with surge immunity or the ability to use waves? Already done by low dragon. What about wave immunity? Brainwash Dragon has that. This made it so that I had to either go into a weird direction when giving him talents or to make it so that he's immune or dishes out debuffs. But I decided that a weird direction would probably be more effective given who he is. Talents: attack and defense buff, 20%, 250 NP for both. Level 3 surge, 5% chance, max 30%, 125 NP, 350 to 500 range. Explosion immunity, 75 NP, double bounty, 75 NP. Total, 525 NP. Attack and defense are standard as he'd gain 37k HP and 4.8k DPS, which makes him only a bit weaker than a completely maxed out and talented little dragon, so it's likely that this would become your strongest dragon purely stat wise, unless you somehow have a totally maxed brainwashed dragon or you already have a maxed out talented little dragon. This alone makes him worthwhile, but here comes his stranger talents. Least Strange is a level 3 surge at a 30% chance for 125 NP that spawns between a range of 350 to 500. All this means is that the surge will deal the same damage that he did 3 times within that area, and this time it's area attacking damage. So if it hits, best case scenario, the enemy you're attacking will take 82k damage. Though most likely it'll do 61.7k damage instead, assuming the single target hit didn't hit who the surge affects. For reference on how strong that is, Can with a max attack up at level 50 only does 11k more damage than Manic Dragon's surge, as she deal a single target damage of 72k. This surge is very powerful and the range is pretty consistent, which is why I made it only a 30% chance. His other 2 talents are just strange, but hear me out. Explosion immunity would allow for him to counter whatever enemies have the explosion ability obviously, which could make him usable in the Bahamut talent stage, and it could make him useful for whatever the Xenobeast probably comes back as an enemy in future stages. And it'd be useful for when explosion becomes a more normal ability like waves or surges. It's basically like a future investment, as currently it has very little application. Double bounty may seem strange, but you have to remember that this is a dragon variant and it costs 1500 C. And when you get access to talents, the meta of dragon stacking is long dead. Stages don't produce as much money as they did during those days, so a dragon variant that can actually get double the money if it kills, especially with the surge ability, would obviously be very useful so that you can summon more of him. Manic Dragon still has its flaws like costing 1500 C, having a very slow movement speed, and a kinda crappy recharge time in 16 seconds. So I think that even though he'd certainly be your most powerful dragon variant, he's both expensive to upgrade fully and he might not even be usable in some stages purely because of his cost despite his double bounty, which is why I'd say that a unit that can do a surge that deals 82k damage at best between 350 to 500 range is actually balanced. He's basically like a heavy version of Brainwash Macho legs. Manic Jamiera. Here's one of my personal favorite cats, and potentially my direction with him talent wise may be one of the more controversial ones as they're extremely basic. Talents: attack and defense buff, 30%, 250 NP for both. Move speed up, 11 and 21, 125 NP. Wave chance up, 15% chance, 30% chance, 125 NP. Cost down, 1950 C to 1050 C, 125 NP. Total, 625 NP. Attack and defense buff are at 30% because Manic Jamiera needs it, and with it at max he'd have 111k HP and 11k DPS. It's definitely better than his previous 85k HP, and it actually allows him to tank for a bit. But the reason why I didn't buff it further has to deal with his cost down talent, which is what I balance him around. Move speed going from 11 to 21 makes him kind of a tanky rusher, and it allows him to enter blind spots more easily, which is something that he was already pretty useful for. A wave chance increase from 15% to 30% might sound OP because of his high DPS and because it's a level 10 wave, but it's still pretty rare and it's about equivalent to Jelly Dumpling's wave at level 30. It's more like a nice thing that could happen, and a 30% chance is still so low that it'd be similarly surprising for it to happen and not at all dependable, kind of like Dancer's surge ability. As for his cost down from 1950 C to 1050 C, I did this because for all Jamiera variants, their main problem isn't their stats but their cost. For 1950 C, you could summon many other cats that are just better than him, be they tanky like Row or Soap, or other cats for damage like Dancer. But this cost down allows him to be practically on the same level cost wise as other units that have about the same HP as him, though this is balanced by the fact that those units usually have a resistance against a trait, like Soap or Row, but he doesn't have any resistances. He's just a generalist with high DPS and movement speed. Overall, the goal here, like for every other flawed Crazed cat, was to make sure his main issues are fixed so that he's still usable. And in this case, fixing his issues just came in the form of not majorly buffing his HP, giving him a target or new ability, but instead just to make him actually usable and better for what he was intended to do. Conclusion. Overall, if I had to pick 2 of these guys of talent if these talents were real, it'd be Manic Island and Manic Jamiera. Manic Island because who could pass up on that, and Manic Jamiera because with those talents, he actually sounds pretty usable and worth his cost thanks to his really good DPS and speed. Comment down below on who you talent, and also give me feedback on what you think of these talents. Are they balanced or broken, and what talents would you give them instead if you disagree with what I did here? Anyway, make sure to subscribe to my second account where I talk about art and review comics, subscribe to this channel for my battle cats, and before I leave, here's a final verse from the Bible. James 2:1. My brothers, show no partiality as you hold the faith in our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory. I had a question about a verse I shared on one of my community posts, so I think it'd be a good idea to talk about the last verse I show, like how I used to do in my older videos. This verse simply tells us to not have any bias towards or against anyone, and it further instills Jesus' #1 command to us as Christians, which is to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. He uses the example of treating the poor worse than those who are rich, though of course this can expand to pretty much any other differences between us and others. As usual, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a blessed day.